Yeah.
Well, you're grouchy.
No, I'm not. It's just what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Yeah, well, he's taking his lead from the mayor. Go ahead. Because we don't have any minutes to it now.
I'm sorry.
Good evening, everyone. The meeting of the Finance Committee is hereby called to order. First order of business is budget revision, GT 817, transfer from salaries to accounting services.
Yes, thank you. We're requesting. Thank you. We're requesting to transfer $60,000 from our salaries accounts to professional services / accounting services. This was to hire a temp, essentially to fill the same function as the vacancy. So there's money in the salaries, and because the expenses are paid out of the operating budget, that's why we need, or in request of the transfer.
So it took me a long time to read through all the documentation here.
I know it's very lengthy.
Could you give us just a little more detail? Who left and
Just started.
what did they do and what are we backfilling?
Well, ostensibly, they were helping in preparation of the audit, getting the cash reconciliations done, just doing general ledger reconciliation work. Quite frankly, they did a very good job. Yeah.
So is this the same temp coming back?
They are working on a contract basis now, and then which reduce the overhead to the employment agency, and they may then they also may apply for the permanent position.
So it's a net zero impact on your
On
budget?
the budget, yes.
Yeah. Mr. Chair,
Okay.
you have a request?
I'm sorry, Alderman Finlayson.
Two questions. Is this the normal salary for a 6-month temp, 60,000? And second question is, how much is in the unused salary account?
Currently, there are, I believe, 3 vacancies. Correct me if I'm wrong. 3 vacancies. So there's sufficient funds in the salary accounts to do this transfer.
How much?
I don't have that right now.
Ballpark.
Again, three vacancies. Well over $100,000. Well over $60,000.
Are we talking 300,000 left there? Are we talking 200,000 left there? Are we talking 150 left there? I'm just trying to get a...
Again, I would say over $100,000, but I don't have this. We have 3 vacancies, and those vacancies range in different amounts for different durations of time that were not vacant. So we would have to do a little bit more of an analysis at this time. When we put this transfer request forward, again, there is definitely sufficient funds to cover the request.
Can you tell me what the average salary of one of our accountants is?
Again, depending, this is for an accounting too.
Could you use your mic, please?
Go ahead and speak.
This position was for an accountant. Typically, an accountant position runs somewhere between $59,000 to somewhere in the $70,000s annually, depending on experience and at what step they come in upon hire.
Okay.
Typically with temps, there's an upcharge, so that's why it's more whenever you hire through a temp agency, they rack on some additional expenses.
So part of the 60,000 is the expenses for the temp agency that's being used?
Yes,
Yes.
probably
Oh, yeah.
a third of,
A third of it, you said?
typically, we don't know what the employee gets versus what the agency gets, but it's not unheard of that the agencies get, 30%, depending upon the level, the salary levels and whatnot.
Mhm.
But we don't know that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments about this GT?
I move approval.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Legislation before the committee, 0417, the water service agreement for the McDonald's Corporation. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
I got here late, sorry.
My name is Jim Beecham, Acting Director of Public Works. How can I help you with the McDonald's
Just tell us sort
water
of why,
service agreement?
yeah, why we're doing this and
They are-
anything you think we need to know about it.
They are outside but adjacent to the city limits. They are currently on well water, and as the wastewater line was cutting across their property to the shared wastewater treatment plant, they worked out an arrangement with Anne Arundel County, who is the beneficiary of an easement required across the McDonald's property for that wastewater line. They made an arrangement so that the county would pay for them to hook up to City of Annapolis municipal water supply. And the county will be paying the regular engineering-derived dollar amount in terms of facilities and hookup fees, and they'll be able to get off of well water. We have an existing water line right out in front of their property. They've already dug a test pit to confirm its location and size, have submitted engineering drawings, which our team has reviewed and approved.
Great, thank you. Any questions, comments?
This was reviewed by Environmental Matters, and we were comfortable with recommending approval to the council, so I would move the same with this committee.
Okay. Is there a second?
Yes, second.
Moved and seconded, favorable recommendation of the full council of 0417. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then we have R217. Alderman Finlayson.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have come to ask that you postpone action on R217. As we're all aware, we heard a presentation on Thursday from the actuary on the DROP program, and this legislation would extend the DROP program, which currently goes for 3 years, by 2 years. At this point, we don't have sufficient information to make a determination as to whether we can move forward with extending the time. So I spoke to my city manager this morning, and he said we're not going to know those numbers until June. So I would like for us to postpone action. Would that take us 90 days, 120 days?
Thank you. I think that makes sense. But Alderman Arnett?
But it was my understanding that there was a bigger issue here, which is, can we really do something different for fire than for police? And I see the city attorney's here, but I think I had heard we can't. So I'm not sure what postponing will do. If we can't have two different drop programs without separating the two pension funds, it doesn't, a postponement doesn't seem to accomplish anything.
Mr. City Attorney, you have any interest in being heard on that? I mean, my instinct is obviously that we could easily just leave it alone for the time being and come back at some point when other events come along, but.
Good evening, Mike Leahy, City Attorney. As Alderwoman Finlayson stated, the actuary has given us information that says that a drop program typically runs very differently in the first several years than it will on an ongoing basis after that. And so, based on that information, it really is premature to, in their eyes, make a decision. With regard to the question that Alderman Arnett raises, that there is one pension agreement, and to amend it, you need both the police and fire to agree to that. In our particular case here, the police union has said if we move forward with amending it, they will sue.
Seems
So
to be going around.
it's not so much that nothing may ever happen with this, but as the plan is currently written, you either have to have both parties agree to some differentiation in how the program works, or an agreement that it's going to be 5 years for everyone. And there seems to be some disagreement between those parties, which has not been explored beyond the point that the police unions have said they don't favor it at this time.
Sure. But I think there's a couple of other issues that we need to address. One of them is what we do when it's found the drop is not budget neutral.
Well-
And that I think is a big issue and a big omission in the current agreement that I would like to see addressed.
Well,
before we-
the agreement, and this is a question of how much weight you want to give to what the actuary is saying presently. When this started, there was no condition established. It said at the end of 3 years, we will determine whether or not it's cost neutral. And if it is not, the unions would re-enter into negotiations, as you had talked about the other day, with the city to determine how to make the program cost neutral. And if that couldn't be done, no new people could enter the program. That's a very open question right now. The numbers we did receive from the actuary say at the end of the 3 years, based on their projections, so for what comes at the end of June, they expect it will not be cost neutral for this first 3-year period. It will lose money. But again, they gave a number of caveats about those periods are typically different, and as you don't have anyone else potentially entering the program until December, we do have some time to talk about what actually is going to come out of those numbers and then how to address them.
But the other issue, and this came up at the pension plan, and both Mr. Miller and Chief Stokes were at that, is it's not clear to me how we're accounting for this drop money, but I have this uneasy feeling that it's sort of riding along with the rest of the investments, but when someone actually retires and comes from their drop, all of a sudden a big chunk of money comes. Right now we think we have $164 million and change. But some of that, I think, is a liability for these drop program dollars. And so when those dollars come out, all of a sudden, instead of having $164 million, maybe we have 162.
Right.
And there's some concern on the investment committee about the volatility that introduces. And
Sure.
certainly that has a big impact on our level of funded.
Right.
We're not
And I'll
90
defer to Mr. Miller, but it's my current understanding that although the drop funds are not sequestered, they are accounted for separately. So they would not be part of the pension account. They would be accounted for as separate monies, but they're all in the same fund.
They're essentially they're in the same fund.
So when I look at 164 million, that they're in there.
Because what happens is that if you, the whole thing is predicated on return assumptions, et cetera, okay? So if we want the return assumptions, we can put them in a designated fund, but they will not be part of the investment pool. They'll be just more of a cash type designation because of the
Right. But when we look at the
segregation.
actuarial tank.
They're part of that
They're in that tank.
They're in the tank.
And
Right.
so our green line is really lower than we think it is by the amount of these drop liabilities.
That's correct.
So I think there's a lot of fixes we need to make relative to the drop, and I assume that those are things that need to be negotiated. I don't have the sense they're in the current negotiations, but it turns out if you take those monies out, we're not 90% funded, we're 89 or 88% funded.
It
when
won't
you
make
take
that, it won't
liability
make that
out.
much of it, but yes, I get your point.
Okay.
Your point is well made.
I think Alderman Finlayson has another comment, but I think my instinct is what she recommended, is that we basically table this and sort of leave it alone until we see if the negotiations bear fruit or not, and then we'll,
But
See what
these
we are.
don't have anything to do with those items.
Well, actually they do, because there are any number of fixes to this problem. One being at the bargaining table, where they could redo the drop. Another being the plan itself and amending the plan so that if there is actually some legal ramifications, that can be addressed. So postponing this gives us an opportunity to fix any and all of the problems. And the unions may be talking a different story in a week. And so, or less time or more time. But things are changing in the city constantly. So I think to postpone it gives us an opportunity to look at all aspects of this and actually get the real numbers, because I don't think many of us walked out of the room on Thursday feeling that the actuary had given us precise numbers on anything. So I think that all needs to be worked out in order to move this legislation in one way or another.
okay. Any other questions or comments? I'm happy to make a motion unless
I
someone else.
move that it be continued
Okay.
for 120 days.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. And now, ID 5617, the Keeping History Above Water. Thank you very much for coming. I was hoping to move you up before the stodgy
No
legislation,
worries.
but
No
thank
worries.
you.
Thank
She
you for,
enjoyed this scintillating conversation.
my name is Sharon Kennedy. I'm here representing the Historic Preservation Division under Planning and Zoning on behalf of Ms. Craig. As I always do when I testify before the committee, I disclose that my spouse is the alderman from Ward 1. You have before us, I had a meeting, the reason I'm here is because I had a meeting with Mr. Miller and Mr. Leahy and Mr. Elson and Mr. Gutwald about this project, and their advice was for me to come forward and talk to you as the Finance Committee and then probably up to City Council, because this is a program that's got some new twists and turns for us in terms of the fiscal accounting component. And so we wanted to walk you through it and make sure everyone was aware of what we were doing. So you should have 3 documents. I have hard copies if anyone is having trouble getting to what
Who would
I
that be?
distributed. Who would that be, Ross? You all good, or could you use a hard copy?
I actually got into it.
Okay. So the first one is what I call the synopsis, and it looks like this, and it's got a Keeping History Above Water Annapolis. And I just wanted to point out, this is the last public outreach component of the Weather It Together campaign that's been running for the last 3 years. It will close out the outreach communication and add public component of that planning process, and then we'll be moving into the implementation process of the Weather It Together plan. And it was because of all that investment in Weather It Together that we were selected by the Newport Restoration Foundation to be the second location of the second session of Keeping History Above Water. So it dovetailed really nicely, and it's allowing us to leverage off of all the investment we've already made with our partners in this planning effort. And this sort of details out for you the sort of themes we're going to be working through in this conference. And basically it's about how do you do adaptive strategies for coastal communities with a very specific look at the Chesapeake, because it's not just Annapolis and Newport and Savannah, which are sort of the big guys, but it is Chestertown and Cambridge and all of the smaller towns who can't pull together these resources to do this kind of planning, that need a template to then be able to, you know, fundamentally help their communities without doing all the hard work we've been doing for the last 3 years. So that sort of lays out for you what the conference is on the back page. It gives you some idea of the kind of sponsorships we've been able to put together for this. And it's a pretty impressive group of folk who are supporting us in a variety of ways. Just in terms of who we're bringing, that's the second item. It's called speaker bios. It gives you an idea of the level of folks we're bringing for this conference. It's a pretty impressive team, I have to say. And I would say it's all due to Miss Craig and her remarkable network of people. So it's a pretty good group. And these are all, except for, I believe all of these are confirmed speakers at this time, with the exception of Craig Fugate. Any questions on those two documents that are just sort of the laying it out there? Okay. So the last thing I wanted to go through with the Finance Committee is the financial forecast. And the reason we felt it was important to bring this forward is this is, as you can see from the P&L I've given you, the majority of support for this program is coming through sponsorships, which are private or public entities who are giving us money, and registrations. And that doesn't have an easy bucket inside the existing fiscal flow in the city, is it fair to say, Bruce?
Yes.
And so we met early to try and make sure we had all the regular policies, procedures, protocols, and safeguards in place, but allow us to still do this program. And so basically what the recommendation from the Finance Committee, Director, is to put together a revolving fund where all of these non-grant monies will go into the revolving fund, and then the grants can flow over to that revolving fund for reimbursement purposes, and then we can disperse all of the monies we need to disperse to run the conference that way. So we just wanted you to know this bucket was sort of getting created to support this. As you can see, it's pretty much a break-even budget. We don't intend to make money. We might, that could be a good thing, but it's planned as a cost-neutral event. And with that, I will take any questions the committee has.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Alderman Barnett.
Well, what would happen to the money if we made some? Does it just fall to the general fund, or would it stay in planning and zoning with the sea level rise efforts?
Well, the whole concept was, number one, to keep it in its own revolving fund for accountability purposes, and also to keep it away from the general fund. A revolving fund is a multi-year fund, so we can collect funds this year and use them in September when the need is there, versus collecting the money this year, having it to follow the fund balance. And, well, thank you very much for the contribution. The grants are, again, multi-year. So if there's a balances on the grants, we have to use it for the intended purpose. If there are funds in the revolving fund, again, I would argue that they would have to be used for similar purposes, but there would be discretion relative to...
You could have a scenario on the back end where you close it out, you've paid all the...
Exactly, that's right. So they could, to your question, they could be used for sea level rise purposes.
Okay.
Well, and I think from our perspective, having going out and soliciting these sponsorships, we feel an obligation that if, you know, let's just say we did make money and my contingency just fell to the bottom line, wouldn't that be lovely? We would go back to our donors and say, let's talk about how we're going to use this money to support the things you gave us the money to do. And quite honestly, I think it's going to be a pretty easy sell, because the next big item is the implementation of the plan, which is what everybody really wants to see happen. So I'm not too worried, but it is the plan, or the vision is that there will be a revolving fund for the Historic Preservation Division to do this work.
And Bruce, do you need some endorsement from us to create a fund, or is this just sort of to take everyone's temperature about it?
Well, to be quite honest with you, to make sure there are belts and suspenders, I would like the budget, so to speak, to be adopted or approved, or, you know, some formal acceptance. Acknowledging and being aware of the fact that the grants, any grant that we get in the name of the city, has to come to the Finance Committee anyway. But I want to make sure that everybody was aware of what we were doing and that things seem appropriate to you.
But you don't need a motion or,
It wouldn't hurt. I wouldn't mind it, just being that anal retentive accountant.
I move that this committee express its support for this project. I suppose that's what you would want.
I would certainly second that. I was going to ask the other side of the coin question, what happens if it falls short? Are we accepting any city liability for?
During our meeting last week, we had a very lengthy conversation relative to the disbursement processes of the city, and that funds cannot be dispersed unless there's cash in the bank. So everybody is aware of that, and we'll be working through that. So I do not anticipate that we'll have, but I guess to your question, if the expenses accrued, not paid, exceed, or we might have to have a conversation.
I think, Alderman Arnett, if I can speak to that, the place that there's any real question mark is the registrations, if people don't show up, because the donations are pretty much pledged already, we just got to get the paperwork done, and same thing with the grants. I will tell you, this is a small conference, there are only 240 slots. We have already, through the solicitation of the sponsorships, between 80 and 100 are already pledged. So we don't have a lot of seats to fill. We're kind of anticipating we're going to be sold out so fast, people are going to be cranky. But the good news is a lot of the variable costs in the operational budget are linked to the number of bodies that show up. So if I don't sell the ticket, then I don't have to spend the money with the hotel to feed that person and do all the rest of the stuff. So it's a pretty tight relationship that we can manage down to alleviate that concern.
Thank you. But before we take a vote, Alderman Finlayson, you have?
My question was along those lines. Does the conference registration fee cover the cost of the necessities for the conference participants?
It covers the variable costs. It does not cover the big costs like room facility fees, the honoraria, the travel. We have a manager coming in to help us with that because this is not something that's in our wheelhouse, so to speak. So then that's what the sponsorships cover. They cover the stuff to put it on, and the registration covers the operational cost to present it, if that makes sense.
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So we have a motion to express the Finance Committee's support for creating this revolving fund for this purpose. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just for my own purposes, does this need to go further up the council, or are we done?
I think we're done.
I think, yeah.
Awesome.
Are
Not
you
that I don't.
implying that we're not at the very top of the heap?
I wouldn't imply anything of the sort, Alderman Mayor.
And you could say food chain. I mean, you know.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. So those are all the formal items on the agenda. Bruce, do you have any finance update or anything you want to get into?
I wish I had a little bit more information to provide you, but it's
fine.
pretty much status quo.
Okay.
If we don't pass the resolution or the legislation to change the code for when the mayor must report the budget, will you have a budget by the second Monday in March?
The appropriate answer would be yes.
Yes, there will be a budget.
Actually, I was going to ask about that. Obviously, assuming we do that tonight, what sort of how should we think about planning our finance committee process? Which usually we were used to this exercise of how long we have, but so it'll be condensed a little bit. Do you have some thoughts, maybe how we might want to do that slightly different than we've done it in past years because of the timeline?
Obviously, it does shrink the window to discuss. You know, it depends upon how far into the budget presentations, departmental presentations, the committee wants to get to, and then what other pending issues there are. I suspect that you know, the last couple years anyway, we were meeting once a week, which was a pretty comfortable pace. I know there were other years that we would meet 2 or even 3 times for longer durations. That may have to be brought back on the table. I think, quite honestly, with a little bit more time, we could get into, meaning me, could do a better presentation relative to some of the schedules that would be more informational rather than that big income statement, budget statement. So I think there may be some opportunities to make the process more efficient. But I think also because all the numbers theoretically would be known by that time, not only the tax issues, not income tax, but the real estate tax, some of the information relative to grants and the costs or flows from the state and or county should be nailed down a little bit more, so there won't be as much revenue uncertainty. So, which probably would add to the productiveness also. And I know Alderwoman Finlayson is concerned relative to the union negotiations, which may be a little bit more concrete at that time. So I think all in all, it'll just lend to a more efficient process, and we might be able to pick up on the back end that time.
Good. Well, I think we probably need to start hashing out once we do move to this new schedule, assuming that's what the council decides to do, to have a framework of how to meet and when to meet. And I know there's been interest in talking to some of my colleagues of doing more what we used to do, which is spending a little more time at the front end with each of the department heads. And I think there's a sense, and I think in the last couple of years where we got into the whole sort of 88 sections, sort of got away from that a little bit, but especially with all the changes and all the different departments at the department head level, I think there's a sense probably having some of those conversations at the front end would make some sense with whoever's running each of the different departments.
So another thing we had gotten away in the last 2 years from is seeing the enhancement requests from each of the departments. And I think I heard the city manager say that we would get to see those requests again. Is that your understanding? And do we in fact have
Quite
enhancement
honestly,
requests?
we do not, at this juncture, I have not seen any of the enhancements. We have not compiled an enhancement list.
Why do I have this feeling that, yeah, you can ask for any enhancements, if you do, you're gonna get hit on the knuckle with a ruler?
No, I'm being completely serious. The budget right now, and the work I have done do not include, I have not seen any enhancements.
If you don't ask for a list of enhancements, there's no list of enhancements, right?
No, I mean, as you know, the big numbers are going to be, yeah. So, thank you. Couldn't say it better. In public safety, that's where.
Right, and I've already heard that there's talk about rolling public safety's overtime number back to the old level.
Well, there's different ways that you can evaluate, commit the dollars. The big commitment right now is adding police officers, and what that will look like. Assuming that you add officers, then the conversation, is there an ability to decrease the overtime if you have more officers? Nothing is definitive at this juncture, so there's a lot of moving parts. But yeah, that's a topic of conversation, and I think it has to be a topic of conversation.
So what I have a sense is happening is in last year's budget, we increased the overtime amount to something that was much more approximate to the amount that was actually being used. And then the mayor asked for a supplemental $1.25 million, which the council approved, for even more overtime. And now it sounds like we're retreating back to the 700,000 number, which would be significantly below what I would suspect is more like a 1.4, particularly if we're getting into community policing, which we haven't
These
seen
are
or
all,
heard that.
again, these are, in order to formulate a budget, you have to have dialogue relative to what the policies and what the priorities are. Nothing has been finalized, nothing, you know, but I think we would be remiss if those conversations were not had.
Sure.
So, you know.
So just consider this an expression of interest and something that I will be
So noted.
looking at, and I
Yeah.
expect my colleagues on the council will be looking at closely.
I think everybody is very sensitized to this issue.
Okay.
so.
The other
A preview
thing,
of coming attractions.
the other thing is open government. We don't have an accountant for that yet, but that's one of those things that allows us all to do various analyses of the budget, actually jumping right from munis to open government, but certainly to generate pie charts and bar charts and timelines and,
Nikki, you want to speak to that?
So last week, our IT department met with OpenGov, and we set up the necessary computer software and portals for essentially OpenGov and Munis to openly communicate with each other. So that was step one. I have an email out